Us now, Democratic member of the Foreign Relations Committee, Senator Chris Coons of Delaware. He recently returned from a trip to Israel and Saudi Arabia as part of a bipartisan Senate delegation. It's great to have you back on the show, and we will give the first question to David Ignatius from Washington. David?
Senator, I want to ask you, after your trip, if you would just describe the balance of the Biden administration's policies. We've heard strong support for Israel, President Biden's powerful embrace of Israel after the tragedy of October 7. But since then, we've heard increasingly calls for humanitarian pause, civilian assistance. And the second part of the question is what we're talking with Saudi Arabia about. Is there any chance that Saudi Arabia could be in the future part of some new way of governing Gaza after Hamas's military power is defeated?
Well, David, thanks for those questions. The bipartisan delegation I was a part of a week ago did go to the region to meet with Crown Prince MBS in Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, and with President Sisi in Egypt in order to press both of them about what could this look like on the other side. Is there a path towards peace? Is there any future plans for how Gaza after Hamas would be governed and organized? How to support with humanitarian relief the 2 million Gazans who are now trapped in Gaza, and how to work together to try and secure the release of hostages. We also met with senior Israeli leaders to press many of those same concerns. Your first question, David, was about the balance that President Biden is striking. Look, in the middle of two international crises, both the conflict in Ukraine and the conflict now in Gaza, I am so grateful we have a seasoned and capable president with a balanced team around him. His forceful embrace of Israel in the immediate aftermath of the brutal attack by Hamas, I think, was exactly the right thing to do. But frankly, more than words, what mattered was moving two aircraft carrier battle groups to the region to deter Iran and its proxies from expanding this war beyond Israel's strike against Hamas. Our president is calling for humanitarian relief, for the release of the hostages, and is working privately to accomplish that future goal of some two-state solution or a pathway towards peace. I'll remind you, Prime Minister Netanyahu has not really been a champion of a two-state solution. In fact, has worked to undermine on the ground the conditions that might make that possible. So there's some very difficult diplomatic and strategic work ahead of us, not just in the short term, but the long term.
I'm sorry, Katty Kay.
Senator, can you talk a little bit about America's relationship with Qatar? Again, perhaps on the other side of this immediate fighting. At the moment, the Qataris are needed, of course, in the hostage negotiations. But would you be pushing, for example, the Qataris not to house the leadership of Hamas any longer after this operation is over?
Look, Hattie, as you say, our immediate concern is the release of hostages. I've met with several families of hostages, and as a parent myself, I can't imagine a more painful circumstance than not knowing whether your child is dead or alive, whether they're in a cage in a tunnel underneath Gaza, or whether they're already dead. And the Kataris are helpful in this regard, but frankly, they have to re-examine their relationship with Hamas. Hamas is like ISIS. They are not a governing party. They're not a resistance movement. They are terrorists of the most brutal type. And in the same way that we are largely successful in isolating ISIS from the majority of the Muslim world, we need to engage in a similar campaign now against Hamas, given what they carried out just 2 weeks ago.
So, Senator, as just noted, the president has given a full-throated public support to Israel, but we know that privately, quieter behind the scenes, also urge them to be careful, proceed cautiously. Right at this moment, as Israeli tanks are surrounding Gaza City, do you have a sense that that message was received by Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu? Is he listening?
We'll see that unfold in the next coming days and weeks. This wasn't just private urging. We also sent over to Israel several of our seasoned military leaders who had the experience of leading the attack on Mosul when we retook Mosul after ISIS had fully occupied it. That was a 9-month grueling urban campaign. We also sent over folks who were involved in the fight in Fallujah in Iraq, which was, in both cases, these were very difficult campaigns. The United States has recent, relevant experience, and it's my hope that the military leaders and the political leaders in Israel are listening. Hamas isn't going anywhere. They can't leave Gaza. They have them completely surrounded. They have no source of resupply. So Israel has the opportunity here to occasionally take humanitarian pauses to allow for hostage release and to allow for negotiations, as well as to target and focus on eliminating the most important and lethal capabilities that Hamas has buried underneath Gaza City.
Senator, I want to talk about the Saudi Arabia leg of your trip. How is this, what's going on? And the pictures say that Al Jazeera is running in Saudi Arabia. How does this affect Mohammed bin Salman's willingness to move ahead with Israel? The other half of that, how does this affect what you and your colleagues are willing to approve? Are you more likely now to approve a security treaty with Saudi Arabia, a nuclear deal with Saudi Arabia? Can you say a little bit about that?
All of that was going to be difficult in the first place. Most Democrats were going to press for a genuine path towards a two-state solution and the genuine inclusion of the Palestinians and their concerns in any treaty or any final arrangement between the United States, Israel, and Saudi. Of course, the concerns about the security, the ability to manage and control any nuclear enrichment technology that might be shared with Saudi Arabia was also a concern on the table. At this point, obviously, the Crown Prince is not popularly elected, so he is not as concerned, perhaps, about the street as those who face regular elections, but this is a region without regular elections. I do think it is very hard for anyone who is in the leadership of Saudi Arabia, the nation that is home to the holiest sites of Islam, to ignore the anger, the very widespread anger on the streets in their country, and the grave concerns of the Palestinians and all who support them. So I think this makes that pathway towards peace longer and narrower, but not impossible. Look, the reason Hamas took this attack at this time with the support, training, and equipment of Iran was to prevent a reconciliation between Israel and Saudi Arabia. We cannot let Hamas win.
Senator, unfortunately, the American public sometimes can only balance one foreign policy priority at a time.
If that.
If that. And now it seems to be Israel. What about Ukrainian funding? Do you see that being a fight to get through Congress? How important do you still see what's happening there with Russia, which Russia seems to be the biggest beneficiary right now of this new conflict because so much attention has turned from Ukraine?
Well, in terms of our short-term attention, the public, that's correct. But the war in Ukraine continues to grind on. Tomorrow on the Appropriations Committee, we will have a full hearing about the supplemental funding request President Biden has sent us. My recent trip to the Middle East makes me more confident than ever that we have to pass robust aid to Ukraine to support them for another year, significant aid to Israel. We also need to continue to invest in our counter-China initiatives. Look, we need to be able to show the entire world that we are a trustworthy and reliable ally, that we stick with the fights that we say we're going to support, and that we see the connections between Iran and Russia. Iran is a critical military partner, both with Hamas and with Russia in its aggression against Ukraine. If the United States is to be the force for good, I believe it to be, we also have to include robust humanitarian aid in this package. That comes out of my subcommittee. There's a request for billions of dollars for the World Food Program, for other UN agencies that help with refugees, that help the Palestinians, that help the Ukrainians, and that help fight hunger and famine, which leads to instability across dozens of other countries. It's critical we adopt a robust supplemental package.
Democratic Senator Chris Coons of Delaware, thank you very much. It's always good to see you. Thanks for coming in. So the State Department